The summer coat pattern sew along. Part 4. Another combination for you. The fully lined pencil skirt, pattern number 485. I love the way the long back vent shows the smaller vent in the skirt. A little bit daring. Here is the 3-part sew along. I cover linings, concealed zips, skirt vents, hems and everything else to do with making the perfect skirt. In part 3 we got as far as setting in the sleeves. Now for the lining. This is the back lining. First of all, we will reinforce these angles with stitching and then join the centre back seam down to the dot, pin baste stitch and press open, and then join the back facing to the back lining, matching the notches. So we are joining these two curves. Stay stitch this edge just inside the seam allowance and snip. Pin, baste and stitch and press the seam down. The more snips you have, the easier it is to match the curve. Now we can move on with the lining. The side backs to the backs, and the side fronts to the fronts, and the side seams. Pin, baste and stitch matching the notches, clipping along curves where necessary. We have joined lining panel seams and side seams and pressed them open. Turning it right side up. We can't yet join the lining shoulder seam as the front facing needs to be joined on. This is when we attach the lining to the main part. This is the front facing. So next we stitch this seam joining the facing, lining front, match notches, clip where necessary. Before we stitch this seam, turn up and baste a ½ inch, 1.2 centimeters along the lining hem. When matching this seam, pay close attention to the curves. Pin, baste and stitch, press the seam towards the lining. The lining is attached. I have made the facing quite wide as this coat looks great wide open. So the facing will be on view. Now we can join the lining shoulder seams. That will give us the lining armhole ready for the sleeves. The lining shoulder seams are stitched. Before I press the lining shoulder seams open, I will remove some of the bulk in the seam allowance. Take out what you can in the way of surplus seam allowance. This will make a big difference in the final finish of your garment. Now press the seam open. Next, we will finish the neckline. So we have the lining in place and we are ready to complete the neckline. So turning everything inside out, I can line up the backs. The shoulder seams. Fold along the front fold line and around to the other front fold line. Both will be marked with a dot. Pin, baste and stitch. Clip before turning through. The neckline seam is stitched. The seam allowance must be graded. That means trimming layers at different lengths so there is less of a step. I would normally make the facing side shorter. Trim away all surplus seam allowance at the seams and then snip into the seam allowance all the way round so that the curve will turn through smoothly. Also mitre the front edge corners for a good point. This is pressed well. Don't worry too much about keeping the seam to the inside, as these corners can open out as revers if preferred, or just let them fall naturally. This little tool is very useful for turning points and edges. See my site for supplies. I'm going to baste around the neckline to keep everything in place, while I continue with the remainder of the construction. Next we'll add the sleeves to the lining. For the lining sleeves, follow the same process as with the main garment. Join both sleeve seams. Though you don't need the ease stitching, just pin in and baste any fullness at the sleeve head. We need to get the lining armhole inside out, which is slightly awkward. Grab the armhole from the inside and turn through. Here is the lining armhole. The sleeve lining is right side out. Match as before. Dots, notches and seams, easing when necessary. Pin, baste and stitch. Run a second row around and trim. The inside is looking neat with the lining sleeves in place. Next we add the shoulder pads. And for the sleeve head padding, I'm using Demet this time. I explain this in full in the Boxy Jacket Sew Along. Before adding shoulder pads, I'm going to add a little padding to the crown of the sleeve. It's called the sleeve head. I am using plain wadding this time, but you can use many other fabrics, soft or stiff, depending on the effect you want to achieve. So I have cut 2 pieces of wadding, each about 8 inches or 20 centimetres by 2.5 inches or 7 centimetres. Fold not completely down the centre, baste and trim the ends to soften. The sleeve head is positioned at the top of the crown. With the folded edge against the seam line. It is placed a little more towards the back. So getting inside once again, This is the back and this is the front. I'm going to align the fold with the armhole stitching line. I'm placing it a little more towards the back, say 5 inches or 12 centimetres, and less at the front. When that is turned through, the result is some soft padding of the sleeve crown. This will make all the difference to our boxy look jacket. Here is the sleeve head in position in our linen coat. Back to the boxy jacket sew along. From the inside again, this is the front and this is the back centre seam. I have hand stitched the sleeve head to the seam allowance at the seam line. That will push out into the top of the sleeve like so. Now to the shoulder pad placement. This fat edge is positioned along the seam line and is loosely hand sewn to the shoulder seam allowance at the neck point end and at the shoulder point, and sewn very loosely at these 2 points so that the pad doesn't distort the armhole. Position the pad a little more towards the back. It is essential that you baste in place first and try on your jacket to check the overall look. Try on before fixing the last point of the neckline. The shoulder pad is now stitched in 4 places. The sleeve head padding is in place. It's difficult to make this look neat, but the lining hides it all. So pushing the sleeve lining back in place, I'm happy with the result. Linen isn't easy as you can't shrink away fullness. Creasing is part of its charm. Check out the pencil skirt pattern and download the free ebook. The 3-part video tutorial covers so many useful skills. Sewing vents, all about concealed zips, and much more. Full membership costs just £30. You can download all my sewing patterns and access fashion design resources, or just buy individual patterns. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so, and thank you for watching.